Hello and welcome back to the MatchDay Review Podcast with myself, Aidan Christo, and as usual I'm joined by Lewis Hall. And as quickly as the Bundesliga is back, it's over again.
It was nice and refreshing to see a proper game of football last night. Played at pace, high tempo, a bit of bite in the tackles, but as with everything in German football, Borussia Dortmund huffed and puffed, but Bayern Munich were the ones with the end product, and I think last night's game encapsulated the Bundesliga over the past decade. That Bayern Munich are just a class above and clearly have that winning mentality and streetwise nose to get through difficult periods in the biggest games in a season.
Yeah, so last night's result, Bayern beat Borussia Dortmund 1-0 in, well, what was effectively the title decider, I suppose you could put it. Puts them 7 points clear at the top of the league. 6 games to go. It's just, you can't really see Bayern throwing that away now, so they just edged that a little bit closer to an 8th title in a row. And I'll be honest, I don't know what I expected going into this game is kind of what happened, I suppose. We both said before the match we expect Bayern to win it. I mean, I thought maybe there'd be a few more goals in there given the nature of the two teams. You know, they're attacking fullbacks. And Dortmund's inability to defend, so it would seem against Wolfsburg at the weekend. But it was nice, I suppose. There was 2 games before the Klassiker, so you know at least there was a bit of a title race still going on. I guess it is still there, but it does feel a little bit like the Bundesliga's gone just as quickly as it came back again.
Last night was a strange tale compared to the 2 games we've seen in the previous weeks, which was. It seemed as though both teams had a bit of an inability to defend. You saw at the weekend Bayern Munich shipping goals against Eintracht Frankfurt. You saw Borussia Dortmund shipping chances and really should have conceded against Wolfsburg at the weekend. But last night, both defences were talismanic. Standout performances from Mats Hummels, Lucas Piszczek, who we did give a lot of grief and said that he couldn't defend to save his life at the weekend. And I guess that's the MDR touch of magic where he puts in the performance of the season, the game after. And then on the other side you got Alphonso Davies, who's quickly becoming, if not the best left back in the world, but one of the best. And David Alaba is somehow moulded in to the perfect prototypical left-footed centre-half.
Yeah, I didn't actually see the whole game. I've only seen highlights. I know you sat down and you were able to watch it. I was in work, unfortunately. But from the first minute or so, it seemed like Dortmund were kind of intent on attacking. Manuel Neuer was definitely intent on making a fool of himself.
Franz Beckenbauer Neuer, what a player.
Getting nutmegged by a bit of a P-roller from 20 yards out from Haaland in the first minute. If only for Jerome Boateng being on the line, Dortmund would have been 1-0 up. But the goal itself, actually, I just want to talk about it. What a fantastic finish by Joshua Kimmich for a central defensive midfielder.
Right back.
An ex-right back. To have the calmness and the ability to see the goalkeeper off his line and chip him from outside the box. You'd be giving praise left, right and centre to some of the best strikers in the world if they came up with that finish.
Yeah, and it was the fact that he had the ability and the wherewithal just to slow the game down at that precise moment, because it had been chaotic around that Borussia Dortmund 18-yard box in the moments leading up to it. And like you say, he's just put a foot on it, noticed the keepers really at the edge of his 6-yard box, not that far off his line, and just add the finesse and quality to just dink it over the keeper. One of those finishes that you could see Andres Iniesta doing in his prime, or even Clarence Seedorf, but like you mentioned, a converted right back into a defensive midfielder to pull off something like that just shows you the levels of quality that is throughout that Bayern Munich team and throughout the youth system in German football.
Well, I do want to point out that we mentioned it, I think, when we first spoke about Dortmund in the first week the Bundesliga came back. He did actually do quite a good knee slide into the corner. We said we wouldn't see one for a while, but he did run into the corner and do it, and I was very happy to see that. I know there's no fans, but I do like a good knee slide.
It's just with Bayern Munich, and Kimmich is one of the biggest examples of this. You see all the other big clubs in Europe, Real Madrid, Manchester United, going shelling out 60, 70 million pounds on players to put them as defensive midfielders or to put them as fullbacks. But Bayern Munich just have a player who's a starter in a fullback position and go, I think he'd be half decent at defensive midfield. And then they create another world star and fill a void in that squad with one of the players that are already there. And I think the master's at it, and it's one of the things that sets them apart as a squad building club.
He was Philip Lahm's understudy, wasn't he, just before he retired a couple of years ago? So they were kind of grooming him in that position then.
Was he not the... I know he was the understudy, but I distinctly remember under Pep Guardiola that he had ousted Philip Lahm from the right-back position, and that's why Guardiola pushed Lahm into a defensive midfield spot in the last couple of years of his career.
Yeah, because Lahm definitely moved into the middle, didn't he? Which, if you think about it, kind of makes sense for someone like Philip Lahm, maybe, because at right back he had a fantastic reading of the game, and maybe as you get a little bit older, your legs go, and being in that middle of the pitch anchor position kind of suits you a bit better because you're not bowling up and down like you used to. So maybe that's, he's seen that happen and has said, yeah, I can do that. And obviously Benjamin Pavard's come in now, and he also plays right back for Bayern Munich, which kind of just pushes Kimmich more into that defensive midfield position where he is so capable.
I think saying capable is doing him a massive disservice.
You know what I mean? Yeah, okay, he's one of the best defensive midfielders in the world, but it's kind of a luxury that if he needs to, he can then go back to his original position of right back. And by the looks of that finish yesterday, he could probably push him slightly further forward as well.
Well, speaking of central defenders and full-backs getting forward, Mats Hummels was the most proactive in getting forward in the first half for Dortmund. There was 3 or 4 times that he was effectively in a number 10 attacking midfield position on the counter-attack and just couldn't find that final ball through to Haaland, Brandt or Rafael Guerreiro. And I think that was symptomatic of what Dortmund were yesterday. Was a team that were very nice, very swift in transition, winning the ball back pretty easily from Bayern Munich in their own half. But then there was no end product. There was the picking of the final pass when on a counter-attack was non-existent. There was too much, particularly in the second half when Emre Can came on, too much slowing down the game and one too many touches when he got the ball in central midfield. And I don't know if that's a testament to Emre Can thinking he's better than what he is, but yesterday he didn't shine himself in glory for me when he came on. He kind of sucked the life and the energy and the direct power out of that Borussia Dortmund midfield.
It kind of goes by the same script, and it's a story we've seen for a number of years now, that this Dortmund team has, well, for as long as I can remember, I suppose, been a team full of youthful exuberance, so to speak. They've always got some of the best talent in the world, like young best talent in the world in their squad, but they're quite raw when they're there, and then when they they eventually get snapped up by somebody else and they become superstars. But because it is the place where young players go, it's also a place where young players leave, and they never really get the ability or the time to kind of knit together a team full of slightly more experienced players to put a proper title challenge up against Bayern Munich, because they always seem to get so far and then kind of they fall by the wayside towards the back end of the season when the pressure gets ramped up again.
Yeah, and I think you can attest that to the age of some of Dortmund's biggest stars. You mentioned it yesterday as we were talking about it, that it was the acid test last night for the likes of Achraf Hakimi, Erling Haaland, Rafael Guerreiro, even Manuel Akanji. These players who are clearly stars in this Dortmund team, and Haaland and Achraf Hakimi are going to be stars on a world stage for bigger clubs than Borussia Dortmund when it's all said and done. But it's last night you saw their age and lack of experience come to the front last night, because when it got difficult, when Bayern Munich made it tedious to get the ball back or not as easy to drift into those dangerous attacking positions in the channel or along the wing for Hakimi, you saw him fade out of the game, and that was quite evident for me that Bayern Munich were easily nullified, those two players in particular.
Yeah, we'll talk about the transfer window happening later on, but could the fact that maybe the transfer window being a bit skew-whiff this year, and the whole idea of it being up in the air currently, help Dortmund then, because they might keep hold of a few more of those young superstars than perhaps they would have this summer, which then I suppose it might give them the ability to kind of knit together that team. They've had the experience of a title race. They've lost 1-0 to Bayern Munich yesterday. The race isn't over, but we don't expect them to lose it from here. So it could give them that that spur them on next year to try and win. So go that one step further. Maybe usually in the Klassiker, I can't remember now the last time I remember a Dortmund win, but it might just give them that edge. They've got these team of young superstars who've had a year experience, and they can go on next year and really mount a challenge against Bayern Munich.
Possibly. Well, you're going to lose Achraf Hakimi to Real Madrid because he's going to return on loan. Last night, I wasn't shown anything from those Dortmund players that they had the, not ability, but the, that extra bit of experience in terms of how to get over the hump. And you just feel as though Bayern Munich are toying with them, and when Dortmund go to another level, Bayern Munich will just be like, alright, let's flick it into a higher gear and let's go again. I just feel as though Bayern Munich's stranglehold on a Bundesliga is affecting the likes of Dortmund because these players and these clubs haven't won for so long. It's now 8 years without Borussia Dortmund winning a Bundesliga title, and you can say, they got to the Champions League final under Klopp, but again they lost to Bayern Munich, and it's symptomatic and symbiotic of what the Bundesliga is, that you just need some cocky upstart type team like a Red Bull Leipzig or someone like that to come and bloody Bayern Munich's nose before the others see that they're capable of winning that league.
In that case, then, is it one of the weirder derbies and rivalries in world football because one team is so dominant when it comes to winning the league and even the head-to-heads? Because you got the Klassiker obviously in Spain, Madrid, Barcelona. You're never really too sure. It can go either way. That you got the Manchester derby or the North London derby over here. Even the Merseyside. Well, I suppose maybe not the Merseyside derby because that's kind of follows a similar pattern. But Dortmund are so far behind Bayern, and Bayern is so dominant in this fixture and in the league that you try and big it up. It's given its nickname of Der Klassiker, but it is incredibly one-sided.
Yeah, it's unique in that aspect because you mentioned the Merseyside derby, but that's a local city rivalry. Dortmund and Munich aren't in the same area in Germany or in the same city. It's a real strange one because what struck me last night, particularly listening to Owen Hargreaves on commentary, he was mentioning how Dortmund always play the best in the first Klassiker of the season, even though they got slapped this season. And then once it comes to the business end of the season and the return fixture, Bayern Munich just seem to always win that. And it's, again, comes back to that, having that stress test in terms of knowing you can withstand the pressure and win when you're in the absolute melting pot at the tail end of a season.
For Bayern Munich then, we expect them to go on and win the league this year. Is the next step then winning that Champions League title again? Because I would have been last year, even as early as last year, people were saying that this Bayern Munich team wasn't as good as it had been in recent years. I mean, even going into this season when Tottenham played them before they got thumped 7-2, people were saying this Bayern team wasn't the team of old. But all of a sudden, this team looks like it's ready, and probably, I would say, if it comes back, favourites to win the Champions League even this year.
Yeah, I think you can put a lot of that on Niko Kovac, the manager who unfortunately lost his job this year at Bayern. I think he tried to implant himself into Bayern Munich and change what the culture of Bayern is in terms of how they play and how direct, how they gel together as such a cohesive unit and a team that since they've removed Niko Kovac, you've felt as though you've got your authentic Bayern Munich back, and Hansi-Dieter Flick as a new manager has far and away exceeded any expectations that Oliver Kahn and Karl-Heinz Rummenigge and the Bayern Munich board could have, but also for those players because he's given them a sense of confidence, and you've got that air of authority back around the Bayern Munich team, and I think that's shown with the re-emergence of Thomas Muller.
Yeah, it's almost that blend of youth and experience that I think maybe Dortmund are lacking. They kind of lean heavier on the youth side, whereas Bayern Munich, you mentioned they brought back Thomas Muller. You've got Manuel Neuer in goal. Robert Lewandowski's been there and done it both, for Dortmund and Munich. He's won countless titles. Then you've got the youth of Gnabry and Alphonso Davies, as you mentioned earlier. And it kind of looks like that. It's almost that perfect blend you need to win the Champions League. You always see these teams. You see exciting young teams like Ajax last year. They can get so far, and then they kind of fall away to teams with more experience in them. And it's that mixture of the two that you need to kind of push you over the line.
this year's, if the Champions League comes back, and we'll get on to what UEFA have said about that a little bit later in a podcast, but this Bayern Munich team has never had a bigger open goal to win the Champions League than this year. It's far and away ahead in terms of quality, squad depth, you mentioned experience, of any team in Europe, and they always show that when the heat is turned up to 11 and you're in those pressure, massive situations, they just course through it. They make it look as though they're playing on a Saturday afternoon against Mainz when they're playing in a Champions League semi-final or in their Klassiker, when really if Dortmund would have won last night, the Bundesliga is wide open because it's 1 point in it with 6 games to go. We always joke, particularly when we're doing the project rebuilds, that teams should look at Bayern Munich and how Bayern Munich operate in terms of football structure, technical understanding of both the business side and the playing side of football, but also the recruitment. And last night, Owen Agres in particular was reaming off the players who are injured or can't get a game in that Bayern Munich squad, and most of them walk into some of the biggest teams in Europe. And you just look at that squad and it's perfectly constructed to win the Champions League. You've got lightning pace of Alphonso Davies, who can also defend. You've got a left-footed centre-half in David Alaba, who reads the game better than anybody I've ever known, on a par with Paolo Maldini for me, from what I've seen of him this season. And you've got Manuel Neuer, who's the stalwart German international goalkeeper. And you just go forward and you see that. You see the midfield with Thiago Alcantara, a goal scorer like Robert Lewandowski, who's knocking on the door of 40 goals in a season again and getting no fanfare for it. And you talk about the blending this youth as well and this exuberance with Serge Gnabry. And it's just a phenomenal team and a phenomenal club.
You mentioned there then Robert Lewandowski getting almost no fanfare for his 40-plus goals again this season. And this raises a point that when we were talking last week about the Scottish League and Celtic winning it 9 times in a row, which you kind of expected that there was no, there's no uproar that they won it because people just thought, they're going to win it anyway. So is it a case of Robert Lewandowski not maybe getting the respect he deserves for scoring 40 goals a season because people don't see the Bundesliga as a competitive league, so to speak? I mean, we've seen 3 weeks of their football now. And what have you made of it? Because we're not avid watchers of the Bundesliga, but this has given us a real chance to actually see the quality of some of the teams.
I think it's unfair to level it being a farmers' league like we do with Ligue 1 or with the Scottish Premier League, where Celtic and Paris Saint-Germain respectively are leagues ahead of the competition and can take weeks or even months off and still win at a counter. The beautiful and great thing about this Bayern Munich team is the Bundesliga is relentless from what I've seen. And if you take a step off, you're going to be in a dogfight, and you're in a fight every week. But Bayern just continue to win, even though they're being challenged from the likes of Red Bull Leipzig, Borussia Mönchengladbach, Bayer Leverkusen, Dortmund. It only takes Bayern really to have a couple of off weeks, and those teams are right back into it on the tail of Bayern. I'm not talking about this season, I'm talking in terms of a full-length season. And I think that then attests to how special and great this Bayern Munich team is, that they haven't really been able to take the foot off the gas going into last night. They had 17 wins and 1 draw in the last 18 Bundesliga games, but Dortmund are still only 4 points behind them. If you had that, you've seen that level of form in the Premier League this year, and Liverpool are 22 points clear. The
sample we've had to take from three games after a return of 2 months off, whatnot. It's not exactly the biggest petri dish to take your sample from, but I understand where you're coming from, and I think maybe the top teams are, I think maybe like the Premier League, that it does break up into smaller leagues within that table. You've got Bayern Munich, Dortmund, and maybe you could push Leipzig up there as this top 3. Then you've got 4 or 5 teams battling out for that 4th Champions League spot, and then kind of below that you break up into those mid-table sides and then those getting relegated. But what's interesting about the Bundesliga is there is often that 4th spot, I suppose, with the Champions League is usually someone different. When you look down to the Champions League places, it has been Wolfsburg in the past, Leverkusen, you've seen Schalke in there recently. It does chop and change a little bit, and then someone like Leipzig has come up in recent years and looks like they're there to stay for a little while. So I think it's a competitive league in that sense, but like you said, I think Bayern Munich are just streets ahead of everybody else, and their professionalism and ability just really comes to the fore, especially now when you can see it firsthand.
With you mentioning the other teams, I think it's comparable to the Premier League because you see it with that bottom 4 or 5 teams now up to about 30 points with Union Berlin. All really couldn't complain if they got relegated from what I've seen in the past 3 weeks. Lacking quality, lacking awareness and understanding of how to grind out a result or nick a goal and sit on it. I think as the Bundesliga, I think it's because it's not got the flash of all these Latin players, the flair players like Cristiano Ronaldo or a lot of the Spanish players. It's seen as more of a working man's league and a formulaic, conventional style of football, which I think is a disservice for the league. And just to touch on what you mentioned about Robert Lewandowski, whether he doesn't get the fanfare he deserves for the goals, I think it's because it's not all about him with the Bayern Munich team. He scores all these goals, but he works so hard for the team. He's back defending in the left-back spot on 3 or 4 occasions last night. And he puts that shift in. It's a weird one for me, really is. And I don't know if it's to do with the fact there was some understanding that he was using Bayern Munich to possibly get a jump to go and join Real Madrid a couple of years ago, and that move seems to have never materialised. And whether he hasn't been marketed because Bayern didn't expect him to stick around.
Possibly. We spoke about the other teams in the league. Dan, last night there was another game where Leverkusen lost 4-1 to Wolfsburg. For Wolfsburg, it doesn't really do much in their attempts to reach the top 4. They're still 11 points behind Leverkusen, but it was Leverkusen's chance to go back ahead of Mönchengladbach into that 4th spot.
It's such a wild result, that, considering Leverkusen have been so organised. They've carried a massive goal threat from the games I've seen since the restart, and Wolfsburg at the weekend looked toothless, completely toothless against an abject Borussia Dortmund team. And to pull out 4 goals last night against Leverkusen has really shocked me.
It was, I think it was 4 set pieces. They got the goals from. One of them was a deflected free kick. There was a couple of headers in there as well. But I guess in that sense, when we talk about the comparison to the Premier League, that's the kind of result that you would almost expect, in that there is this team chasing 4th spot and they stumble unexpectedly against a team that, from what we've seen, didn't really offer too much going forward the week before. It's just one of those results that come out of the blue, and I suppose when you talk about how competitive the Bundesliga is, that those are the kind of results you look at when you think about how competitive a league really is.
Yeah, and it's refreshing as well because it's adding subplots and little rivalries throughout the league. And what I've seen from other games I've watched in the past 3 weeks is these teams are never phoning it in. They're always fighting, they're always biting into tackles, being very competitive, making sure that they're always giving it everything to try and win every loose ball, win every 50-50, chase down lost causes. I think a massive example of that is Yusuf Poulsen at Red Bull Leipzig, and pretty big statured for him individual at 6'5", but he's busting a goal for every loose cause. It's refreshing to see for me, because a lot in the Premier League you see some teams who go 2 goals down and they're just like, oh, not again.
But yeah, because we said that in the first game, didn't we? When we watched Dortmund and Schalke, we did think that if you get games that are 3-4-0 by 70 minutes, teams might just be calling it a day given the lack of atmosphere in the stadium. But it doesn't appear to have been the case in the other games that have been on. And even in this one, Leverkusen got their goal in the 82nd minute. So teams aren't chucking the towel in quite as much as perhaps you might excuse them for, given the scenario and the circumstances.
From having this massive focus on a Bundesliga the past couple of weeks, I found it's been exciting for me because it's a different brand of football. It's a different way of football. Feels it's far more end to end than what the Premier League's become. The Premier League's become a lot of it, let's just pass it sideways and look pretty. Norwich as an example, Arsenal as an example, and there's no real bite or competitiveness in a lot of the mid-table games in the Premier League. But from the Bundesliga, it's just been proper games of football, particularly over the last weekend and then last night. Last night was the Klassiker. It just felt as though we've got the sport back. It felt as though we've got a proper high-tempo game of football with the utmost quality around the park. And as much as Bayern Munich won in the end, you can't take away from how well Mats Hummels defended, how well Piszczek played. Mo Dahoud played well in the centre of the park for Borussia Dortmund, which shocked me. You've got Rafael Guerreiro, who's fast becoming one of the rising stars in European football on the left-hand side. And you can say the same about Bayern Munich in terms of Thomas Muller, David Alaba, Jerome Boateng played very well, apart from the inevitable slip and, I might just handball it so it doesn't go in.
Yeah, actually, that was the point. That handball decision in the second half, I was completely forgot about that. As did the referee by the looks of it, though, because that was about as blatant VAR call as I think I've seen.
Yeah, but there was no appeal from Erling Haaland. There was no appeal for any of the Dortmund players or any alright, let's just hide Boateng so the referee can't see him from the Bayern players. It was as though everybody was just like, alright, it's decent block, it's a corner. And you would have expected VAR to pull the referee up on that, but it was just a really weird one for me. And there was one in the second half as well where Ikanji sent Robert Lewandowski flying without getting anywhere near the ball in the penalty box, and that wasn't even a penalty. It was, and there was no VAR to that. It was just really weird. But does that show that if you implement VAR the way Bundesliga has done and put the onus on the referee to ask the question, does it work better?
I was going to say, because it shouldn't be up to the players to have to protest for the ref to see it. The people in the VAR room, the German equivalent of Stockley Park, should be seeing that. And because it did go out for a corner, there is opportunity then to say, all right, give it 30 seconds. Just have a look at this. And 9 times out of 10, especially with VAR, you'd expect those ones to be given because it does. He's not looking.
Yeah.
I know the ball is low on the floor because he's sliding, but it does ricochet off the top part of his arm.
I think it'd have been harsh if they gave the penalty, but it was clearly a handball, and you could, especially with what we've seen with Presnel Kimpembe when the Man United Paris Saint-Germain second leg game in the Champions League a couple of years ago, that there is precedent for any little movement of an arm to be given as a penalty. And I could understand if it would have been given, but it would have been a little harsh for me.
Speaking of the Champions League then, UEFA have come out and have set a date of August the 29th for the Champions League final, which I suppose also gives a date for the leagues that haven't started yet to kind of finish before. Almost to get a move on to the Premier League, I guess, at this point.
It's funny you say that, because no sooner had UEFA announced that last night at 9 a.m. this morning, the Premier League are like, we can go to phase 2, let's get back to proper contact training. And it's putting a little bit of fire under the arse of the Premier League in terms of, come on lads, let's stop messing about. Let's just get it finished, because the Bundesliga have proved you can get it done safely. They're going to be given the best medical care, the best testing available in the Premier League. And it's about time some of these clubs and influential individuals stop posturing in terms of trying to stop themselves getting relegated and get on to winning football games. And if that's without... And I can understand if players don't want to play because they don't feel safe and they got family issues, that's fine. You carry injuries in a league season, like we said in the previous podcast. It's about now the integrity of English football, and let's just get it finished.
When the Champions League does eventually return, then one team in my mind that's going to be at a massive disadvantage is Paris Saint-Germain, because this league has been finished for a good couple of weeks now. So they will have had no return to training. They will be far behind the curve of every other team. You always hear this phrase, match fit. With the Bundesliga, coming to its conclusion, the Premier League starting back up again, La Liga's been given the green light to start next month. These teams will have had weeks of football beforehand, and they will be quote unquote match fit, whereas Paris Saint-Germain will only be at the start of their recovery, really.
Yeah.
When it happens. So should they be allowed back into the Champions League? There's a whole thing around France allowing competitive sport to take place, whether they're allowed to train or not. neutral venues for their games and possibly every other game as well. Will they be, and I imagine they will be, at a massive disadvantage when it comes to especially one-off knockout games if that's the way it goes?
Yeah, it's lining up the excuses already for Paris Saint-Germain for the reason they get dumped out in the quarterfinals.
I mean, to be fair, I think this time around it's more valid than the crowd was a bit loud, because I think French football being stopped has put them massively on the back foot this time around.
Oh, I'm not disputing that. There's a genuine reason why you could expect them to be very rusty when they play that first Champions League quarter-final in late August. That's when it's going to be. To be honest with you, I don't see Paris Saint-Germain going pretty far in this competition as it is anyway. You've got Manchester City, who have really all nothing but the Champions League to play for. You've got Bayern Munich, who look like arguably the best side in Europe. Barcelona will be there or thereabouts, and Cristiano Ronaldo will be on a one-man mission to win the Champions League with Juventus. It's a murderer's row of teams for Paris Saint-Germain to go through, and I don't think they've got the heart or the bottle as a football club to go through a massive difficult tie in a quarter-final and then a difficult tie in the semi-final again.
Do you see them when it does come back, it being almost quarantined itself, kind of a sports village type thing
for a week,
where you have a week's worth of Champions League games all in the same stadium?
Yeah.
Teams all stay in the same camp. Yeah, it certainly won't be home and away ties, let's put it that way.
No, what I see happening is that week leading up to the 29th, you're going to have all the teams who are in the quarter-final of the Champions League in Istanbul at the Ataturk Stadium and just bang it out in the type of festival football over a week, the quarter-final, the semi-final and the final. And that's how you get around Paris Saint-Germain not being allowed to play in France and stopping it being sent to Qatar, which at this point would cause more hassle than it needs for European football, and particularly UEFA. My thing is, where'd you house all those teams? Because you can't say, let's keep them all in the same hotel, because it only takes one player or member of staff to unfortunately come into contact with a virus, and then you shut down the Champions League down again. So you've got to find, and there is going to be this, because you've got so many teams in Istanbul, like Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, Istanbul, Başakşehir. There's all these teams who are situated around that city who will have training grounds that you could house teams at. So it's going to be a bit of a logistical nightmare, but you can understand how UEFA see that there's a green light to get this competition finished.
Yeah, but before obviously we jump onto the quarterfinals, there's still half of the round of 16 yet to sort out. You mentioned Manchester City; they've still got to play Real Madrid. Juventus have got to play Lyon, and such as the likes. And then of course alongside the Champions League runs the Europa League, which is that's still on the round of 16 as well. Manchester United have still got to play last. Rangers are still in the competition by the skin of their teeth, so there's all that to sort out as well. But do you see the Europa League going down a similar road of kind of housing them all up in one area, assuming of course the Europa League gets going again? Because we see all this about the Champions League getting going. I hear absolutely nothing about the Europa League and what they're doing with that.
I think a lot of it hinges on what the verdict is from the Court of Arbitration for Sport for Manchester City on the 8th of June. Because if Manchester City are barred from next season's Champions League and it opens up 5th place for the Champions League qualification in the Premier League, it gives UEFA more of a leg to stand on in terms of scrapping the Europa League, because it's obvious Manchester United are the clear favourites for that competition. You can say that that's bias on my part. I don't particularly care, but it's clearly obvious the best team in the competition, especially since Bruno Fernandes has joined. Is there as much appetite to get that competition finished because of that? And is there really a need financially and in terms of image for UEFA to finish the Europa League, unlike the Champions League, which is the showpiece event in European football?
Yeah, I guess it kind of falls into that category of it's almost like it's League One and League Two as opposed to the Championship and the Premier League, whilst those two leagues can be called off and we can sort that out through calculators when the actual football starts. I suppose they want their flagships to be decided on the pitch rather than off it.
It's more difficult logistically to get the Europa League finish. You said there's the extra round of the round of 16 still to go, and the geographical spread of those teams is a hell of a lot bigger than the teams who are left in the Champions League, because really you've got Manchester City, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, Juventus, Bayern Munich, Paris Saint-Germain. You can draw a little bit of a circle around Western Europe there, whereas the Europa League, you've still got Lask, you've got teams from the Ukraine still in it.
Yeah, you've got, so the round of 16, Getafe, Inter Milan, Shakhtar Donetsk, Wolfsburg, Leverkusen, Rangers, Wolves. You've got to go to Greece for Olympiacos. You've got Manchester United and last, like you mentioned, Basel, Frankfurt, Roma, Sevilla, Copenhagen, and Istanbul. Whatever. Yeah, that one.
So there's no Ukrainian team still in it. I've got that one completely wrong.
Shakhtar.
Oh, Shakhtar. All right.
Shakhtar Donetsk is still there. So the furthest you got to go, I guess, you got the Ukraine, you've got Greece, and you've got Turkey. The rest are kind of where you'd expect them to be. But when you reel off those teams and you say Man United are the clear favourites, you've got to say that's probably about right up there with Inter Milan, really. But
yeah, and Inter fell away in Serie A. They were pretty much leaders and pushing Juventus all the way up until January, and then they've gone a bit cold after that. The Europa League's a bit of a nightmare for me, and it has been even before all this happened, because I understand why you'd need a secondary competition to give the likes of Getafe, Sevilla, Borussia Mönchengladbach, these type teams who are just on a precipice of qualifying for the last 16 in the Champions League a chance to win a European trophy and get back into the Champions League. It just doesn't seem like a proper competition for me.
Especially if you were to take the fans out, it would kind of feel a bit half-assed, even more so than I suppose it does already, because playing on a Thursday night it's not even Thursday night sometimes, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
End of Kazakhstan.
Kind of devalues the league, the tournament enough as it is, whereas then if you're playing it behind closed doors anyway, with the expectation that, and I know this is football, you can expect one team to win and they could completely fluff it, but you would expect without them drawing each other, I guess, Inter Milan and Man United probably to be the two finalists. And like you said, if City are banned next year from the Champions League, Man United will get in the Europa. Well, currently in that 5th position to get in the Champions League, and Inter Milan currently sitting in 3rd in the Serie A, I'd also expect to get there as well. So
it gives them more credence and credibility to just be like, it's not worth the risk. We can effectively house the Champions League and finish that off in Istanbul, but to then try and mess about and get something for the Europa League. I know it's sad because you want to see all these teams given a fighting chance, so we can sit here and wax lyrical and say Manchester United and Inter Milan are going to walk this competition all the way to the final, but that's doing a disservice and being unfair to those other teams because they need that chance to compete. But we're in exceptional circumstances. You can't be taking this massive risk that could jeopardise next season just to finish the Europa League. And I think for UEFA as well, they need to have a think in terms of, do we need to restructure the Europa League going forward so that it doesn't have so many games and there isn't such a wide disparity in quality of teams, because it's a bit of a chore, particularly for United, because you don't even have to play well, because we were absolutely shocking before Christmas. We were still winning the Europa League and making it look easy.
Yeah, I think the Europa League may give a bit more of a headache to the big wigs at UEFA than the Champions League does. But I think you're right with the restructuring. Maybe stopping that 3rd place coming down into the Europa League from the Champions League would be a good place to start. We've mentioned that before. And, just jumping straight onto the round of 16 rather than the round of 32.
Who do you think will win the Champions League?
Bayern Munich.
I've said that since the start of the season, and it isn't going to change.
I think even more so now that they have got that head start in getting to that quote-unquote match fitness.
Yeah, because you saw last night that with both teams there was an uptick in tempos and uptick in pace, and it was evident when Jadon Sancho came on, because it was as though he was 4 or 5 weeks behind those players on that field, and he hasn't. That's because he hasn't played from the start in any of the 2 previous games before last night.
Yeah, it does make a big difference. But one other thing then that we've got to talk about is the transfer window. I'd say it's a rumour going around that the dates selected are the start of August to the start of October for the newly reformed summer transfer window. And even if it does go ahead, you're going to see a very, very different situation in the transfer window than you have before, with teams almost reluctant to spend money because of what has happened.
Yeah, I think you're also going to see that not a lot of people in the media, particularly Sky Sports, are factoring in is there's going to be a lot of clubs who are carrying bloated squads who are going to have a massive fire sale because of the financial implications of what has happened since March in Western Europe.
But to have a fire sale, you must have to have buyers as well.
There's always going to be buyers.
Because I think about this, and if we expect there to be a lesser version of the transfer window this year with teams reluctant to buy, not so much reluctant to sell, is there a need for a 2-month period of transfers when you could have week periods in between where nothing happens because players aren't being sold?
I don't think it's quote unquote a transfer window for 2 months. I think it's just a registration period. And I think the transfer window type moniker is just a marketing aspect for media and for clubs.
It's a chance for Sky to get that yellow banner out.
Yeah, and Jim White to get his little tie out, make himself feel as though he's the centre of attention on deadline day, even though it's about the transfers or lack of for the past couple of years. It's more, for me, a registration period for new players, and I do think you're going to see a vastly different football landscape, both from financially and the way leagues operate going forward. I think we're only just at the start of what, in my opinion, is going to turn out to be a cataclysmic event for the way football is played across Europe. You're going to see leagues restructure. You're going to see, unfortunately, some clubs go out of business. You're going to see the end of what was left of the Neymar effect in the transfer window. And you're also going to see clubs prioritise youth players and prioritise being more sustainable. Also, I think a massive benefit that's going to come out of it is we're going to stop this hire and fire, let's just get shut of someone because he's lost 3 games in a week type thing. There's going to be more plans put in place and more time given for managers to build squads.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see, just how far the changes ring once this is, I guess, over, once normality kind of resumes to football. And I guess the moment normality resumes to football will be when there are fans in the stadium, right? So it's a case of when that happens, how do we go forward from there, off the pitch? Because, on the pitch is easier to get right than off it.
True. Well, United are the exception to that because off the pitch they've been world leaders, but on it over the past 5 years have been anything but. I think you're going to see a lot more caution and reluctance, especially from sponsors and businesses and industries outside of football that pump money into the game. It's going to be a massively changed landscape that I don't think you're really going to see any effects of until you get into March, April of next year. I think that's when you'll truly see what the impact of all this has caused. I think in the summer, the transfer window will be, alright, are the big boys going to go and try and get 1 or 2 players, and is that money going to trickle down? And there's also going to be a lot of players who are out of contract, and the likes of Willian, David Silva, these players are going to be massive hot commodities across Europe's elite. Whereas you would have expected, given their age, they would have looked to move off to places like the MLS and stuff like that. Whereas these older free transfers now are going to play massive parts.
Yeah, I think especially this season, but I don't know if it's very cynical of me to think that by the time you get fans in the stadium, start of next year maybe, and the season wheels its way towards the end of next season and the transfer circus rolls into town again next summer, that unfortunately a lot of this might be forgotten, and because the big clubs will have not more money, but the gap between them and the lower teams might be even greater because of what has happened, that you might just see the big boys muscling in even more on these transfers and stretching that gap between them and the teams below them.
Possibly. There's always going to be that chance.
That's a very cynical way of looking at it.
We talked about it even before Christmas, and there was no even everything that's happened was not even on the horizon. We talked about it before Christmas how everything was so unsustainable and had been for so many years. Gylfi Sigurdsson at 50 million to Everton from Swansea. You've got the Richarlison 100 million Barcelona bid in January for him from Everton. That's unsustainable, and that's going to come back to catch even the biggest clubs out if they try to go back to that.
Yeah, there's no denying that kind of money is unsustainable, but what I was getting at is maybe not the figures being so high, but the lower clubs having even less money than before because of what's happened, because they've had almost that lack of income for X amount of months now. That for a year or two you might see that, alright, transfer fees might come down. Gylfi Sigurdsson might now only be worth 30 million, 20 million pounds, but you're only going to be able to see the big boys spending that 20, 30 million, while other clubs are scratching around for, like you mentioned, free transfers of older players and maybe the odd 10, 12, 15 million pound player here or there, because they haven't got the funds available to them, because they're not as big, I guess, commercially as some other teams like Manchester United, Liverpool, Bayern Munich and teams like that.
These lower teams, particularly in the lower half of the Premier League and in the Championship, are going to push hard for a expanded loan system where they can go and get more players from the youth academies of the big clubs and give those players more experience. And I think if that was to happen, you're going to get a good effect for the rest of English football in particular, because these great talents who are just crying out for proper week in, week out men's football at a decent level instead of just knocking it around between themselves in the youth academies, you're going to see that benefit and that reward the bigger clubs later down the line.
Yeah, because it sticks in my mind when earlier on in this situation a couple of weeks ago you had Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and I know what he was getting at, but he said United will be in a position to take advantage of the situation when this is over. And it was, I understand what he's saying, but when I think about it, take advantage of it, kind of last year Leicester were well within their rights to hold on to the £80 million valuation of Harry Maguire, whereas clubs like that this year might be forced to sell for less than what they should be getting because they have to. Because there's now more of that desperation to get 50 million rather than nothing.
Yeah, I also think that statement from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was split up and it was marginalised in terms of what he actually meant.
I know what he meant. I know he wasn't sat there rubbing his hands together like a Bond villain, trying to nick every best player in the Premier League for £3 million.
I don't think he was only talking about transfers there as well. I think he was talking United are in a phenomenal position because of the youth academy, the quality of player that are around the 18, 19 age who are just breaking into the first team at Old Trafford. That United are set, they have a plan, and they have restarted that conveyor belt of youth talent into the squad. There's always going to be these people who are looking to pull United to pieces, and Ollie give them a bit of an open goal there by going, we'll take advantage of it. I just don't think he was talking wholly about transfers. Maybe he was talking about one transfer in particular, that a certain player won't cost 120 million now from Borussia Dortmund. He might only cost 65.
Given the performances he's put in the last 3 weeks,
cost 6.5.
He won't cost anywhere near 100. But okay, just to finish off, then you sent me here a list of transfer rumours to go over. I don't know why you put Mbappe to Liverpool on there at the top.
Because I see it every couple of days, and it's again the top thing on Sky Sports this morning was Kylian Mbappe's praise Jurgen Klopp, so that means automatically he's going to join Liverpool Football Club. A player can praise a manager doing exceptionally well at a football club and doesn't mean he's going to wear the number 7 shirt next year.
Well, for me it seems a bit strange, because actually the headline for me would be if he'd slagged him off. Because you're not going to go into a press conference and go, yeah, he's terrible. What an awful manager. Like that absolutely never happens in football. So for me, that would be more of a headline than going, yeah, he's done a good job, I mean, the man's 22, 24 points clear in the Premier League. Of course, he's done a good job.
Yeah.
It's like, calling a spade a spade.
And someone jump, and I know it's a very, very slow news period in football, but people jumping on that Kylian Mbappe statement there and making a mountain out of literally is a speck of dust on a table. It's going to make these players become more insular and not willing to be themselves in front of the media. I find it refreshing, Kylian Mbappe praising another club and another manager, because it doesn't feel as though everything's just on their own island. You can see there's this that we all know is this level of camaraderie and like mateship between the players and clubs.
Okay, the one you've got written down here is Willian to Spurs or Barcelona, and I guess one benefit to go to Spurs is he hasn't got to do a medical.
No, because he's already done it.
They've got his files on record from 7-8 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's more of Daniel Levy and Jose Mourinho understanding they need to be more frugal in the transfer market, and it's putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5. Tottenham are clearly going to be interested in Willian, given Jose Mourinho's affection for him when he was at Chelsea, and he's that industrious, hard-working, skillful player that Mourinho's teams are built on. But I feel as though Barcelona are just always going to be lurking in the wings for him, and have been for the past couple of years.
Well, I get if Spurs do buy him, do they get the Willian they were trying to buy in 2014, or do they get the one he's gonna like? Does he turn out on the pitch in the shirt from that year? He loses a couple of years in his age, because then he'd be a very good player.
Yeah, he would, particularly on a free transfer, and I can see that one happening, to be honest with you, because
he's a very Mourinho player for me.
Yeah, and Jose will be in his ear. He'll be like, right, come on, let's get this sorted out. And you can tell his time at Chelsea's coming to an end.
You've got Adam Lallana to West Ham or Arsenal.
Yeah, his contract's up, and that's what I saw this morning with the clubs who were at the forefront of the chase for Adam Lallana.
I think West Ham to me makes more sense than Arsenal does.
Why? They're both mid-table London clubs.
Adam Lallana strikes me more of a West Ham kind of player than an Arsenal kind of player. I think he's got a bit much. I think he's got a bit too much bite in him to play for Arsenal. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but Mikel
Arteta's
trying
to instill that. But I don't know. I can see him more at West Ham than Arsenal.
Possibly.
Yeah, like you said, one mid-table London club for another doesn't really make much difference at this moment in time, I suppose. No. We were going to try and steer clear of them, but Shaqiri has been linked to Newcastle and Sevilla. The whole Newcastle situation is... It's very Newcastle, I suppose is the one way of saying it.
Yeah, it's the most Newcastle takeover in the history of football, that it's done. These people have the money, they're going through the fit and proper owners tests, and then everything's gone quiet. They don't know if they have the money, they don't know if they can pass the tests. There's issues with beIN Sports and the Premier League rights deal. It's all a mess, and it's all stereotypical of what you'd expect from Newcastle United since Mike Ashley took over. Yeah,
and finally there, Edinson Cavani to Inter Milan. This to me makes a hell of a lot of sense given the rumours around Lautaro Martinez, and obviously the fact that Mauro Icardi is almost certainly not going back to Milan. They're going to be in need of a striker, even if it's just to sit on the bench while Romelu Lukaku runs the line himself. But Cavani, we both think he's probably a bit too good to be going to the MLS just about now. Maybe give it 2 years or so. So playing, Inter Milan makes sense. They're a top club in Italy playing. You'd expect Champions League football next season and in need of a striker. So
who's excelled already in his career in Serie A with Napoli.
Exactly, he's got previous.
I do think it'd be a mistake if Atletico Madrid didn't try and go and get him, because he just adds something different, a nice compliment to Diego Costa and Alvaro Morata. Granted, all three of them couldn't hit a barn door on some occasions, but
do Atletico Madrid make enough chances to have Edinson Cavani up front?
Possibly not, but I think that's it's an easy kick in for him, because he's not as bad as you make out. He might miss the odd sitter, but
we're big fans of open goals here on the MatchDay Review podcast.
True.
So, you see when you got to take it. On that note, then I think that pretty much covers it, I suppose, for this week. Let me just have a look. We're doing an instant replay again this week. We promise you it won't be
Borussia Dortmund, because we're not turning into a Dortmund fan channel.
We will find another game over the weekend to do, whether that's Leverkusen, whether that's Leipzig, Munich, just not Borussia Dortmund. We can promise you that. There was also in the pipeline is the Juventus project rebuild that will come next week as well. Just before we go, then don't forget to give us a follow on Twitter at MatchDay_Review. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review and a comment over there if you will. Don't forget to go check out the YouTube channel where we break up all the podcasts and put YouTube specific content on there as well. That's just MatchDay Review. Give us a like and a subscribe on there as well. And just check out the website as well. It's www.matchdayreview.com. I think that pretty much covers all the socials, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's everything on the social medias. Just leave us a comment on YouTube or leave us a comment on the website. Send us a message on Twitter. Anything, any ideas you've got in terms of how you think the transfer window is going to change moving forward after this when all football gets back up and running, or any other ideas or stuff you want us to discuss on a podcast. And also, if you want us to do a project rebuild for your club, let us know.
Yeah, and we'll be back, like we said, over the weekend with a project rebuild not project rebuild.
Well,
instant replay. Well,
we do owe a Juventus and an Everton one because we keep talking about them.
Yeah, but we'll do it. We'll definitely do an instant replay for a Bundesliga game over the weekend as well. If you want to listen to that, that'd be great. We shall see you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.